Welcome back, creators, to the Making a Game in HypeHype tutorial series. In the last video, we created a time score and leaderboard for our platforming game, and used the text and speech nodes to show that score and communicate with players. In this video, we'll improve on the look of our score visualization with the UI node. We'll also get a bit into editing premades so we can also add a health bar to our UI. First things first. In the last video, we collected our score and leaderboard logic into this container, but I didn't name it. It's always helpful when returning to a project if things are properly named, so let's fix that now. I'll just call this one score. And now we can open up this container since we'll be working with the nodes we have inside. So in here we have the logic we created last time, which essentially shows our score as we play, and our score is the time here. But it's really plain looking, and it looks exactly the same as every other game that uses the text node to show their score. If we want our game to stand out, giving this a more unique look will help. So let's add to this container a UI or user interface node, and we'll find this in the visual section of the logic library. Now with this selected, in the details panel, we have this edit button, which takes us to the UI editor. In here, we have a bunch of new stuff to look at, but instead of looking at each option one by one, let's just start building our time score and look at everything along the way. At the bottom, we have all the UI components we can use to build our UI, and we can drag these items into the UI canvas, which is right above it. I've grabbed here just a panel. Now that we have this panel on our canvas, we can move it around with the widget, we can rescale it, and we can change the alignment. We can also delete it, but deleting requires a long press so you don't accidentally delete stuff. One very important thing when placing things on the UI canvas is the alignment. HypeHype can be played on many different devices with many different screen dimensions. The alignment will anchor the component to a specific part of the screen, so the placement can adjust based on each player's screen size. If you move stuff around, it's going to automatically try and anchor it to the closest anchor point, but that might not always be what you're looking for. As an example, I'm going to drag another panel in here, and I'm going to place these two panels so that they're right on top of each other. Now, if we exit and playtest, we can see that those two panels are much further apart than they were in our preview. If we want those two panels to appear the same way that they do on the canvas, they both need to be set to the same alignment point. This panel here is aligned to the center, while this panel is aligned to the top. So I'm just going to change this one to the center as well. And you can do this from the properties here or from the widget. Now if we play test again, we're going to see that those two panels look the same way that they do in our preview. Okay, so let's start to actually build our score visualization. I'm going to start by deleting this second panel that was just there as an example. Now I can grab the first one and we can resize it and place where we want. You can resize with the handles, but I already know I want this to be 350 by 100 pixels, so I'll manually input those in the property values here. And for now, I'd like this to be in the same position as our text score, so I'm just going to move it up to the top center, and I'm going to use those alignments and snapping to make sure that it is nicely centered at the top of our screen. Now let's look at a few of the properties we have in the properties panel over here. First, let's change the color. We can tap the color preview, and this opens up our color selection. These are the UI colors, so you can pick from any of the existing ones or make a new one. I like the background to be dark with a little bit of transparency, and we already have an alpha 50% there, so I'm going to go ahead and take that. We can also select a shape for our panel. We have a bunch of different shapes to choose from here, but for what we're building right now, the rounded corner shape I think is going to be good for our purposes. We can also change the border. Since we have a dark background here, I would like to have a lighter border, so I'm going to change that to white, and I'm going to make the width 5 pixels. And now we have a nice white border around our shape. We have a bunch more options here, but for our purposes now, this one's looking pretty good. Next, we're going to add a text component to display our time. From the components menu here, I'm going to drag the text and I'm going to hover it right over our panel there. This will attach it to the panel. Now in the hierarchy menu, we can see our panel and our text component that's underneath it and indented a little bit to let us know that the text is embedded in that panel. In the hierarchy panel, layers appear in reverse order, so the layer at the bottom of the list appears on top of all the others. If we drag our text score and put it above the panel, we can see there that it's now being obscured a little bit by the panel. But we put it back there and it goes right in. And as we move things around, it's going to automatically attach or detach from items. So if we move this text out of the panel, we can see it automatically detaches from the panel. If we move it back in, it automatically attaches back into the panel. Now, let's set up this text component. First, it's always good to give it a name. Let's call this one time. Whoops. Next, I'm going to set the text to be a 0, and this just lets the component know that we're going to be working with values instead of text. We'll want our text size here to be much larger, so let's try 1.5. The next menu we want to look at is inputs and outputs. This menu allows us to activate inputs or outputs for components on the canvas. For this text node, we want to be able to input a value, so we'll toggle this value input on and hit confirm. With time, it's good to display decimals, so we can see that number climbing every frame. I'll set our decimal value here to 3, and of course, our format is going to be time. And I'm going to go ahead and disable this outline. You can barely see it on the dark background, but by default, the text has a black outline to help it stand out. Since our panel already helps separate it from the rest of the screen, we don't need this, and removing it is going to make the text a little bit easier to center. Now, let's jump out of the UI editor and attach our time score. You can see here when I select the UI node, we now have the time value as an input in the details panel. And this uses the name of the component plus the type of input it is. Another great reason to properly name things. If you have a bunch of inputs and outputs in your UI node and you haven't named anything, it's going to be really hard to tell which one is which. So now let's grab our old text node and we're just going to delete that. We don't need it anymore. And we're going to grab our time and send that output to our time value. This is just displaying the value, so we do not need to convert this into an executing link. And we're going to talk more about the different types of links in the next video. Now let's give a test and see how it looks.
Welcome to MyAB. Reach the finish as fast
Not
as
bad.
you can.
Looks good, but let's jump back into the UI editor and add a little more polish. From the components, I'm going to grab an image and drag it up to our panel. And then we can tap the image preview in the properties panel to select a different image to use. We want something that's going to represent time, and we have a nice clock icon here that'll do nicely. White's going to be a good color for now as it matches our other elements. We don't need inputs and outputs. When components are embedded into another component, the alignment is going to be based on the parent component. And since our panel here never changes size, it's not super critical exactly where in the panel this item aligns to. And then the last thing we're going to want to edit here is the size. Now, regardless of what these images look like, all of the images in the UI component are square. So I'm going to resize this one to 60 by 60. And that's a pretty good size. Now I can align it with my text. I'm going to move it over to the side a little bit, and I'm going to take my text and I'm going to move that to the side a little bit as well to offset it from the icon. And of course, I want to make sure that everything is nicely centered in the panel. Now let's give it another play test. And there we go. We have a nice looking time display. Last thing we'll do this time is add a health bar for our player. For this, we're going to add some nodes into the player health behavior. To find the behavior so that I can edit it, I'm first going to find and select my player. And then in the basics details panel, I'm going to find the player health, expand that, and then hit this little pencil icon to bring up the player health container. Now, before we start working, I'm going to move this off to the side so that it's in a position where it's going to be a little easier to work with. Now that we have a nice space to work, let's add another UI node into this container. Again, we'll start by putting a panel onto our canvas so that we can animate the progress bar to follow the player. So we don't need to see this panel, so I'm going to create a new UI color that is 100% transparent. We'll call this one Alpha 0. There we go, invisible panel. And then to animate it, we'll need an input. In this case, we want this last one, position from world vector. Now we can drag a progress bar into our panel. Again, with our progress bar, we're going to start with a name. And in this case, we'll simply call it health. The next one is the direction. I like to use right. That means as the bar fills up, it moves to the right. As it is emptied, it moves to the left. The amount is the current health the player has, while the max amount is the total health they can have. Both of these values are going to come from the behavior, so we don't need to set these here. Some color will be good in the health bar. In a future video, maybe we'll discuss how you can change the color based on the value, but for now, I'm just going to set this to green. And I do want the visuals here to match our time score, so I'm going to set the background color to this alpha 50 and the border color to white. Since this health bar is going to follow our player, it should be pretty small. I'm going to set our dimensions here to 100 width and only 25 height. And again, we'll need to check the inputs so the progress bar can get the health value and the max health value from the behavior. Since the progress bar doesn't work without a value, the amount there is already selected for us. We'll go ahead and toggle on the max amount as well and hit confirm. Now we can back out of the UI editor and get those values. So the first thing I want to do here in the player health is find the values that I need to use. And I can see right here we have both of them, max hit points and hit point calculator. So max hit points is our max hit point value and the hit point calculator is our current hit points value. So I'll just grab that. I'll send our value output here into the health amount. And then from the max hit points, I will send that into the health max amount. And now we should have a working health bar. Let's give it a test. Oh, it's going down. Oh, it went down again. Oh, went down. Health bar working. Oh no, I fell off. So our health bar is successfully tracking the player's health, but it is still static on the screen. So let's do one last thing and make it follow the player. For this, we're going to add a few more nodes to the behavior. First, we're going to need a value inspector. And then we will need a vector math operator. So the value inspector is going to get us the position of the player. Since we've put this into the behavior here, it's automatically detected this puzzle piece as our reference object and selected it to the value inspector. It is also by default set to get us the position vector of that object, so we actually don't need to change anything in here. If we drag this value directly to the UI node, the progress bar is going to follow the center of the player, but we want it to be up over his head, so we're going to need to do a little math to make it a little higher. So let's drag this into vector 1 of the vector math operator. Now in the vector math operator, we have vector 1 is the value we're getting from that value inspector. Vector 2 is the value that we're going to add to it. For this one, x and z can stay 0, and we'll make y for now 1. The operation is automatically add, so we can just take that value output to our user interface and set it to this panel position from world vector. And now when we play test, we'll see that that health bar is following the position of our player. And of course, it's maybe a little bit too low still, so we could drop back into this, maybe add a little bit more to our Y value until we get it to a position that we like. And of course, we can also see here that we have the green health bar and the green of our ground maybe conflicts a little bit. We might want to choose a different color for our health bar, but that's something that we'll get into in the polishing phase. For now, we have achieved our goals for today, and that's going to do it for this video. I encourage you to play around with the UI node. We've only scratched the surface of this tool, and custom UI is a great way to give your game a more polished feel. In the next video, we'll continue working with logic, discussing some very useful math nodes, push versus pull links, and progress saves so players can save their progress between sessions. Until then, happy creating. Peace out, Hypesters. Boop, 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 boop. I'm gonna do that again. Should have broken that into 2 parts, it's okay. And we can drag components into the scene, not into the scene. Nope, nope, nope. Based on each player's screen side. Just want this rounded corners box. I would say square, but it can be multiple dimensions. That's too much. Cut it out. In fact, I'm going to go back. Pause. Pause. Why is it not pausing? We now have the time value as an... and we want the health bar to be up over his head. Oh, I went off the screen there.